Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that welcome. Here in this hallowed hall, we are gathered to celebrate in the cradle of liberty. We have an enormous opportunity in front of us, and we're here to celebrate the best of our American tradition. Tomorrow, there is an election. We go to the polls and we vote together. And we are here tonight to talk about candidates and to talk about a campaign, but also to celebrate us as Americans. Our first speaker for the evening is Mellisa Joan Hart.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you guys. Thank you for that intro. Thank you guys. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you all tonight on such a momentous evening. I just want to say I am a fellow New Englander, now residing in Connecticut. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Like Governor Weld, I was born in Long Island, New York, actually Smithtown, which is a town he's very familiar with. I was born one of 8 kids to a poor Catholic family. My dad was a carpenter who also worked at a clam hatchery, was a lobster wholesaler, and now has an oyster hatchery. My mom had me when she was just 20 years old, and 4 kids followed in the next 10 years. My mother started taking me into Manhattan to audition for commercials when I was just 4 years old after I said I wanted to be on TV. I continued to act throughout my childhood while also spending a lot of time dancing, riding bikes, spending time being a kid. By the age of 13, I won the lead role as Clarissa in Clarissa Explains It All, and I moved part-time to a child's Disneyland, well, everybody's Disney World, Orlando, Florida. In that time, my family thought it was important for me to stay human and be a citizen while working as an actress. Public school, college at NYU, church, Girl Scouts. My parents made sure I made all the stops along the way. After a brief stop at the age of 20 to play a teenage witch who actually lived right here in Massachusetts, I met the love of my life at 26, a good old Southern boy from Alabama. So I also got the chance to work at the most rewarding and frustrating job, a parent, to my 3 awesome but very exhausting little boys. I'm still acting and directing, doing movies and theater. Just last year, I wrapped my long-running series, Melissa and Joey, where I played a city councilwoman in Toledo, so maybe that is where I got the political urge. We moved our family from LA to Connecticut for its great public schools 7 years ago. But I've continued to work all around the world and in many great cities in the US, including some exteriors we did for Sabrina the Teenage Witch right here in Boston. Maybe you've seen the opening titles. I am so lucky to have lived out the American dream, and I am proud to do my part to help other Americans live not just a good life, but a great life. I want to do my part to ensure that opportunity exists for all Americans. At heart, I'm a conservative. I'm proud of our past and want to hold on to the values and virtues that have lasted throughout our country and our history. But I'm also a free-minded liberal. We move forward because we know the past wasn't perfect. Slavery, sexism, racism, homophobia, and other remnants of our past have held us back. Not everyone has been blessed with the same opportunities. But that liberal part of me also knows that our differences are what makes us better and stronger. So I'm here simultaneously as one of the Holly weirdos, but also as a good Christian girl. I don't fit in a box, and I assume most of you don't either. I'm a pro-choice conservative supporting the Libertarian ticket. I don't agree with Gary and Bill on everything, but we are all here because we believe in their experience, their temperament, their records as governors, and their good policy sense. They have the wisdom to lead this nation, and because they are the only ones who stand up for both freedom of choice and for limited government. Bill Weld was born, coincidentally, not far from where I was born. His family's history in America stretches back to the Mayflower. In fact, one of Bill's ancestors was a signatory on the Declaration of Independence. Well, we're all here because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all believe those words on the Declaration, but Bill's family read those words while the ink was still wet. Like me, Bill is a host of contradictions, a conservative in ways that anger his liberal friends, an East Coast liberal in ways that anger his conservative colleagues. But Bill is cursed with great judgment. His prosecutor's reasoning mind never quite able to ignore clear and self-evident truths. As governor of Massachusetts, Bill was able to rein in the spending and reach of the most notorious edition of government's gone wild, the state of Massachusetts. In a state not exactly known for its Republican leanings, he was re-elected as Republican governor to Massachusetts with about 70% of the vote. When fellow successful unorthodox Republican Governor Gary Johnson, another fiscal hawk from a liberal state, asked Bill to be his running mate, it was a team that few Americans had seen before. Two truth tellers, both more qualified to assume the presidency than either of the so-called major party candidates. Right? Thank you. And one of the things I love most about these two governors is that they are truly running as a team. We don't see that with the other parties. Both Bill Weld and Gary Johnson managed to oversee tremendous expansions in economic opportunity for the people of their states. And they didn't do it by spending our generation into the kind of debt that has made millennials the first generation of Americans who aren't being handed a better life than their parents. Gary Johnson and Bill Weld want to get government out of our way so that we can make mature decisions about our own lives. They don't want to ruin lives because of silly adolescent choices. And they both think that it's about time for the so-called war on drugs to end and help free up our prison system, which would in fact also bring more peace to our communities between police and minorities. Did you know that we in the US have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners? And those in jail, 80% are facing drug charges. Gary Johnson governed a border state for 8 years. He is the only candidate with real-world experience dealing with immigration. When he was a governor, employment increased along with immigration. Republicans want to scare you into believing that what benefits immigrants will hurt Americans, and that's just not true. Governors Johnson and Weld know how to balance a budget. They both cut spending and taxes while improving services. They are the only ticket qualified to help us achieve a safe and stable future for all of us. They don't think that the government should decide who should be able to start or run a business or what jobs you're allowed to take. Democrats want to scare you into believing that the business people that employ workers and provide for consumers get rich at the other people's expenses. But it's always the richest, most well-connected people and the biggest businesses that benefit from the subsidies and regulations that push competition out of the market. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and the Republicans are feeding you the fear of the foreigner, xenophobia. Donald Trump thinks the way to create jobs is to take jobs away from immigrants and foreign workers. Clinton thinks the way to create jobs is to spend more of your money doing things that don't need to be done. Great leaders don't create jobs. Chairman Mao of Communist China created jobs. We don't want that. Great leaders get the government out of the way so that we can all create jobs in the private sector, so that we can have better jobs making and doing things we want and need. Every day, both Republicans and Democrats together pass laws that make it harder for ordinary Americans of every background to get ahead. While these same politicians make rules to allow them and their friends to laugh all the way to the bank. Gary Johnson and Bill Weld are not politicians, they're leaders. They are the only ticket on the ballot in all 50 states who haven't been corrupted by a scandal-ridden system that produced the worst Democratic and Republican nominees in the history of this country. Together, they support reforms that will change the culture of Washington so that we can expect more out of our politicians. Chief among these, and most important to me, is term limits for Congress. These guys are true leaders, strong but flexible. They trust but verify, as President Reagan famously said. But most importantly, they are honest. They listen to those who know better and they make decisions based on fact, not emotions, greed, jealousy, rage, or impulse. You may have heard one of Gary's slip-ups from the one slip-up from the past 16 months of this campaign, when a reporter changed topics rapidly and momentarily blanked Gary about Aleppo, despite the fact that Gary Johnson has the best and clearest Middle East policy of the candidates. Well, if that's the worst scandal of his political career, I would take him any day over either of the other two. Gary Johnson built his own business, climbed the tallest mountain on every continent, did wonders for the state of Mexico as its governor, and is the best chance for this country to get back on track. Like you, I'm voting for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. The Clinton and the Trump campaigns will tell you that this isn't the time for a third-party vote. Of course they tell you that, because they're the worst tickets the Democrats and GOP have ever foisted upon us. But I tell them that if this isn't the time for another choice, then there is no time. Every vote counts. No vote for this ticket is a wasted vote. In fact, in a state like this where we already know the outcome, then a vote for either of the old party candidates is wasted. I'm telling you, the time is now. This is our time. This is our year. We are going to show them that peace, prosperity, and freedom mean something to the American people. You have a chance to do something tomorrow that has never been done before. If Gary and Bill get just 5% of the vote nationwide, the Libertarian Party will become a political powerhouse overnight. We'll get the kind of funding and attention the other two parties have had all these years. And we get to tell the corrupt old parties that our freedom is not for sale. Just 5%. That's all we need. So tell your friends, tell your relatives, we are sick and we are tired of these two old guard parties. You know that it's time to change. And if we want change, we have to get out there tomorrow and vote for it. And when we do, these aren't protest votes. I know for me, I don't want to vote against someone. I want to vote for someone. A team of qualified people that I can be proud of. And if you agree, let me hear you scream for the next Vice President of the United States, Governor William Weld.
Thank you very much, Mellisa. You and I are here in this room that has served the city of Boston, the state of Massachusetts for years. We are surrounded by images, paintings, busts of people from our past. But those are not images, they are not meant to remind us of our past, but to remind us of our future. Every person that you see here at one point in time engaged in the same activity that you are today, coming together, acting for our democracy. Right behind me is John Adams, second President of the United States, author of the Constitution of Massachusetts. But I'd like to talk about something that he did before all of those things. In this room, 244 years ago, there was a meeting of the citizens of Boston, and they were alarmed about a shooting that had occurred 300 yards over there, right in front of the old State House, the Boston Massacre. A wig maker, actually a wig maker's apprentice, was walking down the street and saw the sentry on duty and said, "You owe my guy, you owe my boss money." Confrontation ensued. Colonists came out into the street. The guard called for backup. 6 more soldiers and a non-commissioned officer came. The 8 of them together confronted a crowd that grew angrier and angrier and swelled till there were 300 people yelling at the soldiers. The soldiers were under strict orders not to fire, except in self-defense. And out of the crowd, a large, heavy rock was thrown, and it hit one of the soldiers and knocked him down. And the soldier regained his feet, and he fired. And the rest of the soldiers then began to fire. And by the time the smoke had cleared, 5 people from Massachusetts were dead and 6 were wounded. The Boston Massacre. When the British governor arrived on the scene, He ordered that the soldiers be taken into custody because the crowd was furious. He also brought in the 29th Regiment to restore order in the city of Boston. And the people of Boston came here and met and expressed their concern. And when that happened, when there was unrest in the city, the governor said, we have to find a way to resolve this with the rule of law, because that's what we're about, which means a fair trial. And if we're going to have a fair trial, I can't have one of my guys defend the soldiers, because if we get the result where the soldiers are found innocent, everybody's going to claim that it's fixed. So we need to find the best colonial lawyer in the area. And so they went and they got John Adams. John Adams, who was a member of the Sons of Liberty. John Adams, who was a well-known patriot, advocating for revolution. And yet, they asked John Adams, he said, will you defend these British soldiers? He thought about it, and although he did not agree with them in terms of the British occupation, he understood the principle of the rule of law. And John Adams stood up and he said, I am a man of principle. There should be a fair trial, and there should be an attorney who will represent them fairly. And so even though he did not agree with the soldiers, he did not agree with the presence, he agreed with the law, and he was a man of principle. And in that court case, he got 6 of the soldiers acquitted, because it turned out that it was self-defense. They were standing there and doing the best they could. John Adams made that decision based on principle. And that is something that's important to understanding the idea of liberty. Because if you want to advocate for liberty, you have to be a man of principle. You have to be a woman of principle. You understand that liberty requires from you a devotion to the idea that we stand for not a government of our convenience, but a government that protects individual rights all the time. So, Mellisa stole my thunder when she quoted the Declaration of Independence, so I'll go with one of our other primary documents. You guys can come along with me. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union and establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare, to ordain and establish this Constitution. Back then, we understood that in order for us to form a more perfect union, come together, but ensure the blessings of liberty, we had to have a framework. And that framework is something that requires principles from us all the time. Because the Constitution is not a list of rules in terms of how we can live together, but is a codification of our principles. And there's so many times that what's in the Constitution could be inconvenient to us. The police could make so many more arrests if it weren't that pesky Fourth Amendment requirement that requires a warrant before they can search your house or your car. Donald Trump has suggested that the First Amendment could be modified to allow him to sue journalists, to threaten the freedom of the press, so that he can silence journalists with a lawsuit threat. But we understand the principle of these things. And even though it might be convenient for us to say, yes, it might be a little bit safer if we got rid of the Fourth Amendment. Yes, it might be what we don't approve of if we got rid of the First Amendment. We understand the principle. And this campaign has been a celebration of 2 men of principle, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. Our candidates here this evening, the men that we are here to support, represent an idea that seems to have gone, that principle trumps politics, that people trump party, that we are gathered together in this noble experiment of America. The idea that you and I, we are citizens together. And that is the proudest title that we can ever have. They are all equally involved in our government. We see in the Republicans and the Democrats the idea of imperial presidency. Candidates promoted by parties who no longer represent the people, but actually serve to divide them. The Republicans will tell you that the Democrats are the worst thing that can come along, and the Democrats will say the same thing about the Republicans. The Republicans and the Democrats want you to believe that politics is a number line. It's two-dimensional. The Democrats will tell you that to the right is the Republicans, and beyond that is the state controlling everything. And to the left, The Republicans will say, or the Democrats, and beyond that is the state controlling everything. Gary Johnson and Bill Weld represent the idea that politics is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. And that third dimension, that third direction is up. That is the direction of personal liberty. When we talk about cannabis, right or left, that's not a right or left issue, that's a personal liberty issue. That's an up issue. When we talk about same-sex marriage, that's not a right issue, that's not a left issue, that is a personal liberty issue. That is an up issue. Dr. King famously said, "A man can't ride your back unless it's bent." And he said that while he was in jail. He understood that for us to achieve liberty, all we have to be willing to do is stand up. But it can't be one person standing up. We have to stand up together. If you've ever been in an audience where a standing ovation occurs, it starts off with a little clapping, and somebody stands up, and somebody else stands up, and suddenly the audience together. And that's what we're looking at when we talk about Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. We're talking about all of us standing up together, not just the candidates, every person in this room. I charge you, you must go out and you must do what every person on this wall, what all of these busts did. I'll refer to one other bust up here, Frederick Douglass, who said, "Power has never yielded anything without a demand." We want change in this country. We must demand that it happens. You do that by going out and voting for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. You do that by going out and supporting a liberty process. You do that by understanding that your rights are your rights and they're not granted to you by a government. You do that by coming here, sitting, participating, and being citizens together. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, R.J. Lyman.
Like Mellisa and Dan, I can't stand at this podium or enter this hall without being inspired by what has happened here and what hangs on the walls and sits on the pedestals here. I was relieved to figure out that we were inspired by different works of art, so we'll talk to different great figures who were here. For me, as I stand here before you, I look to Daniel Webster, who stands behind me in debate in 1830 on the floor of the Senate with a populist demagogue, proclaiming, as you can see in the inscription on the base, that liberty and union necessarily must remain now and forever one and inseparable. And as was true then, so sadly is true now. Our polity encounters threats to each of union and liberty. Speaking similarly to Webster, not as a provincial partisan, but as a clarion for our country and our citizenry, Bill Weld has stood up and stepped forward this year at Governor Johnson's kind and thoughtful invitation. From the comfort of private life to risk reputation and relationships, to sacrifice time and effort, to speak for union and for liberty. Tonight, in this campaign's final hours, I ask you hear him for his cause. Throughout this election, Bill Weld has advocated for union, not in the sense in which Webster had to fight for it, in the sense of keeping states united, but in pursuit of seeing our peoples unified, even as partisans of left and right have engaged in divisive conduct and combat. Donald Trump disparages and denigrates those whose gender, skin color, religion, or other characteristics he whimsically does not share or favor. Division is his purpose, with craven appeal to the basest angels of our nature. Now, Secretary Clinton can be distant and dismissive of those whom she deems deplorable, though fellow citizens they be. And division is sadly still the result between the haves and the have-nots, between those with hope and those in despair. Yet, as Bill Weld has made clear, and as I certainly believe, she may be imperfect. Trump is intolerable. He questions the integrity of our voting process. He seeks to quiet the voices of a free press and repress the votes of a free people. He aspires to co-opt the mechanisms of law enforcement to his perverse ambitions. He poses a clear and present danger to union and liberty. So, in defense of union and in service to liberty, Bill Weld has made it clear: if one must choose between those two, then be with her. But I choose, and I know all of you choose, a higher and more noble calling, which is to be with him. Because beyond speaking against an electoral result that may split our people asunder, Bill Weld has also spoken out for liberty as the remedial lubricant for removing the two parties' corrosive rust, despoiling the political machinery of our democratic republic. As all those who have followed his works know, Bill Weld is not new to the cause of liberty. He has long attended to and faced and confronted and rebuffed challenges to liberty. As a young lawyer, he served House Republicans investigating abuses of power through the Watergate misdeeds. As the nation's chief criminal law enforcement officer a decade later, he called to account his own boss, a venal attorney general, and most memorably to all of us here in the Commonwealth, he thereafter righted our listing ship of state against the fervent protestations of entrenched interest who believed there was only one way to run our Commonwealth. In all, he has demonstrated an unyielding and principled determination in defense of liberty. Throughout his career in public life, Bill Weld has invariably articulated enduring priorities, reflecting a classical liberal philosophy and invoking the conservation of our nation's core foundational values. And at no time in my adult life as an engaged citizen have they required articulation more clearly and thoughtfully than now. Our Constitution must be read and respected, for ours is a government of laws, not of individual men and women. There's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money. spend what should be spent, but cut what can be cut. Our military aims to provide an invincible defense, always at the ready, but rarely at war. Our borders should remain open to law-abiding immigrants from all nations and free trade with all nations. The government should stay out of your pocketbook and out of your bedroom. I've plagiarized so many of your lines, Bill, I don't know why that's the one that got the applause. While protecting all from bodily, discriminatory, and environmental harms. Our economy can best grow by private enterprise that is fairly taxed in order to create wealth that is fairly shared. And our individual rights and personal choices can be exercised freely, so long as balanced with our civil rights to have our communities protected from senseless violence and disproportionate impacts. Bill Weld expresses these foundational principles not merely to stave off electoral disaster this year, and not simply to scrub clean the two-party rot in this era, but even more, to preserve our sacred institutions, to protect our national interests, to defend all of our fellow citizens. Preserve, protect, and defend. These are the responsibilities to which our public servants give oath. These are the causes to which Bill Weld has sworn allegiance in serving union and preserving liberty. So with praise for his cause during this election season, and with thanks for all his service in the months and years to come, please join me in welcoming my colleague, currently in business and formerly in government, my longtime political ally and my even longer-term personal friend, a man who understands, as did Webster in the speech portrayed above, with words echoed by Lincoln 104 years later, that the people's government is made for the people, is made by the people, and is answerable to the people. Ladies and gentlemen, for union and for liberty, now and forever, one and inseparable, I give you Bill Weld.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. A lot of memories in this room, almost ghosts in this room. I've stood in this room with John Silver in 1990, with John Kerry in 1996. I don't know, though, that I've ever felt so exhilarated standing in this room as I do tonight. It's been a wonderful 5+ months, this presidential campaign, and I'm so grateful to my longtime friend, Governor Gary Johnson, with whom I served in the 1990s, for giving me and my bride, Leslie Marshall, the opportunity to be in this campaign. Leslie, stand up and take a bow. Leslie has introduced me from time to time at rallies, and she was the authoress of the phrase that this year seems at times like a scary movie and you can't change the channel. Ain't that the truth? But here we are. I've often said this year that when I ran as a Republican, I always felt that I was part of an organization. And running as a Libertarian, particularly this year, I have felt that I'm part of a movement, not an organization. And I've never felt so much Never felt so much of and from the people as I have this year. Of course, it didn't hurt in forming that impression that we were running against an entrenched duopoly or monopoly in Washington, D.C., who are locked in. This is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Washington, who seem to be in kind of a death spiral embrace. It's death in that they wish each other death, and the two presidential campaigns on top, the R campaign and the D campaign, are faithful reflections of that desire, namely to kill the other party. It's an embrace only because they're joined in their desire to perpetuate their monopoly on political power in Washington, D.C. It's, I think everyone knows, an unhealthy situation for the last 15 years at least. It's been promotive of bitterness and bile in Washington, D.C. So we've had not only government shutdowns, which is ridiculous. There's no need for that. I mean, I've worked in Congress decades ago. That simply never happened because the two parties weren't interested in playing gamesmanship and gotcha with each other. And I first worked for Senator Jacob Javits of New York. And if someone wanted to give a speech on some topic in Washington, in the Senate or the House, the galleries would be filled with spouses, with journalists, with people from Washington who wanted to know whether they wanted to be persuaded by this speech on a great issue of the day. And these days, if someone's giving a big speech, it'll be 3 in the morning, and the camera will zero in on the congressman or congresswoman's head, so you can't see there's no one else in the chamber, and it's 3 in the morning, because it's pure polemics. So much in Washington is pure polemics, and there seem to be only 2 points of view. And any point of view that is not the point of view of your party, whether it's the R party or the D party, is dead on arrival in Washington. And that's no way to get the people's business done. And it's no recipe for creative lawmaking of any kind. And I think people kind of understand that. And we've been, to an extent, the skunk at the garden party in terms of pointing out that it doesn't have to be that way. And just as the people in Washington have been set on brainwashing everyone in the country into thinking you have to take an R ballot and cast it for the R's or else the D's might get elected, or on the other side, you have to cast a D ballot because otherwise the R's might get elected, you will note that there's no content to either of those arguments. Each of those arguments assumes its own conclusion. And there's no content in the argument between the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington, by and large. So in comes the skunk. That would be us. So we're not quite like either of the other 2 parties. We're socially inclusive and welcoming, and we prize diversity, and we want to unleash the energies of every group and every individual in society to promote a more rich and robust polity for the great United States of America. That's not the Republican Party. That's the opposite of the Republican Party's social platform and views. As a party, they went to Cleveland for their convention this year. They said, the platform committee said, can we possibly make this platform more mean-spirited than it already is on our arrival in Cleveland? And they succeeded. They made it more mean-spirited. No big thing, but just one example, conversion therapy for gays and lesbians so they can be cured. Please. So we're not the Republican Party. We're not really the Democratic Party either. If you had to say in one phrase, what's the bedrock principle of the Libertarian Party, I guess it would be liberty and freedom, but it's often represented in shorthand as small government. We are Jeffersonians. We are not Hamiltonians. We are Jeffersonians. We believe that government is best which governs least. was Jefferson who said that government is best which governs least. It was Jefferson who said the sum of good government is for men from hindering one another. It's kind of, not the most ambitious and far-flung view of government, and libertarians pretty much embrace across the board the idea of smaller government. I think it was R.J. who quoted one of my favorite maxims from when I was in office, which is that there's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money. I don't think that's been absorbed by the Washington, D.C. Democratic Party. I think, matter of fact, I'm quite sure that they think when you get those government printing presses rolling, and you really churn those presses, is you churn the presses and the green stuff comes out the other end of the presses, it's really wonderful, green stuff, and they throw it up in the air, and you know what they think it is? They think it's free. And they've said so in this campaign this year. So it's no way to run a household, much less a country, and it's gotten to somewhat alarming proportions. President Obama is going to leave office with a $20 trillion national debt, with a T. When he came into office, it was $10 trillion, so he's doubled it. And I do think it's fair to say that Mrs. Clinton, who's an old friend of mine, as everyone knows, but she has, the press has made sure they know it. But I think that in the conversation between her and Senator Sanders during the Democratic primary, if anything, it looks like a more expansionary view of what government can spend money on has kind of settled into the water table. If she served 2 terms, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that figure was $50 trillion on her leaving office. And, you don't have to be a Nobel Prize-winning economist to know that that kind of debt at the government level is going to make it harder for private businesses to attract the type of capital necessary for them to expand and create jobs in the private sector, and that it will hollow out our economy both domestically and internationally, and it will cost us scores of millions of jobs. This is not a ledger entry. If we have $20 trillion of debt or $50 trillion of debt, it's not a notation in the general ledger. It means we're not holding up our end in the world or at home, and we're like a household that doesn't balance its checkbook at the end of every month. It says, we don't care. We don't care how much money we took in. We're going to spend 3 times as much money. How many households can do that for more than a couple of months in a row? Let alone, we'll put it on the card. Let alone for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So this is kind of elementary stuff. So we're not the R party, and we're not the Green Party. So what do we do about it? So Gary Johnson and I went around and made a lot of noise in the early months of this 5.5-month campaign, pointed out all these things. Gary used to like to say, we've got a 6-lane highway coming right up the middle, because we are in the middle between those 2 parties. We're fiscally responsible, which one of them is not. We're socially welcome and inclusive, which the other one is not. We're in the center. The national polling shows that the combination of those views is held by about 55 or 60% of the people in the United States. In this room, I dare say that would be 75%. So Gary and I thought, easy peasy. We keep making a lot of noise and saying that, and we've got a pretty good addressable market there. It's 60% of the electorate, and if we can get even to 20% by the month of October, we're going to be very dangerous. And we did think this, and I think it was true. At 20%, a party that, a ticket that 3 months ago was at 5%, and 2 other tickets that if we were at 20, they might be at 30, 35, and 2 months ago they were at 45%. Coming into the last month of the campaign, I'll tell you who's going to win that election. The ticket with the 20 or 25% going like this is going to win that election. So I think they really did look starkly at us and figure that we were a substantial threat. And Gary was polling 10, 11, 12, 13% for most of the summer, nationwide, not just in one swing state. So enter the Commission on Presidential Debates. All of whose bills are paid, by the way, by 5 or 6 or 7 big companies that are the major donors to the Republican and Democratic parties, both of whose chairs, Frank Fahrenkopf was a former head of the Republican National Committee, Mike McCurry was Bill Clinton's press secretary. They've made no bones about the fact that their job, those 2 chairs, is to make the debates between the Republican and Democratic candidates as interesting as they can. I must say on that they failed this year, but that's another story. Yeah. And so they were quite honest about their mission, which is to serve their masters, the R party and the D party. And so they said, we have this rule that you have to be at 15% nationwide to get into the debates, even though Ross Perot was at 8% when he was admitted to the debates and got 20% of the vote, 19% of the vote. So, I think that was an inclusionary move, and the other 2 parties backed him up, and that made our scenario of getting to 20-25% in the month of October really a prohibitively long putt, because we were stuck at 30% name recognition nationwide as opposed to 99, which is what the other 2 candidates had after the 84 million people turned in for their debates. Which brings me to the possible avenue up the middle for the Libertarian Party right now. It does appear that we're not going to be up at the 2025 level, but there is a figure that's considerably easier to attain than that has huge legal and political implications. And that is the figure of merely 5% of the vote nationally. It may not sound like much, but it's 5 times as much as Gary got 4 years ago, and people really would sit up and take notice. And the Libertarian Party has enough of a superstructure and enough sinews around the country so that it wouldn't, if it attains the 5% figure, which gives you national party status in Washington, D.C. So you qualify for federal funding and matching funding and no more getting hassled in 50 states for ballot access. If we achieve that status this year, we have a permanent seat at the table for our ongoing national political dialogue. That could not be more important. And the difference between the Libertarian Party and Ross Perot's Independent Party is that we're not a one-man party. We've got the superstructure, we've got tens of thousands of people all around the country, and we will not go anywhere once we get that status, and we will be heard in Washington, D.C. Term limits were mentioned. One of my least favorite aspects of Washington, D.C. is that the members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, are obsessed with their own reelection. With hyper-gerrymandering and hyper-partisanship, the R's have been driven to right. You all know this. The D's have been driven to the left. The only way you can get voted out of your seat is by losing a primary. Therefore, you have an incentive to get either more liberal or to the left if you're a D, more to the right if you're an R. And all they really think about is getting reelected and perpetuating themselves in power. And that is a sick situation, but if you talk to the members about it, there's nothing you can do to persuade them because they think this is their bubble, this is their cocoon, this is their life, this is what they live for. They will not listen. So many people in the United States think, oh, well, term limits is a correct idea, but the members of the House and Senate will never listen. But what they don't know is that the states, under our federal Constitution, have the power to hold a convention of the states and force Congress to take action on term limits under so-called Article 5, even if the Congress refuses. So, I plan to stay with these issues in Washington, even if we don't get our 5%, because morally, the Libertarian Party is already the third major party in the United States. It'll be easier if we get the 5%. And I would say to you particularly, oh ye citizens of Massachusetts, you can feel really good about voting for the Libertarian Party in Massachusetts to get us our 5%. Put it this way, you won't be risking the election of Donald Trump to the presidency. So I'm going to stay with that one. I'm going to stay with the balanced budget amendment. We're going to stay with poking the Republicans on the social issues and poking the Democrats on the fiscal issues. I'm going to stay with the debate commission. They're a 501c3 nonprofit. They're a tax-exempt organization. It's absolutely outrageous that they have not been nonpartisan. Being bipartisan and saying we favor only two parties is not being nonpartisan. They should be dead meat in proceedings to revoke their tax exemption. I'm going to stay with free trade. I think it's clear beyond peradventure that the United States as a whole always benefits from free trade because our workers have so much greater productivity than those of any other country. China is number 2. They're miles behind us. We're always going to get high-wage jobs from free trade. We may lose some low-wage manufacturing jobs. Just to spin it out a little bit, let's say there's an automobile and there's free trade in the automobile industry. It may be that the low-wage, simple assembly of some parts at an early stage of the manufacture would go to Mexico, where wages for that type of labor are lower. But all the high-end stuff is going to be in the United States, and the companies in the United States are going to be able to sell more cars to Japan and Korea than if they didn't have the price advantage of the low Mexican wages. So in the United States, those companies will be able to hire more marketing people and engineering executives, and we will get the high-wage jobs. Mr. Trump has absolutely no idea about this. He thinks that all free trade is a zero-sum game, and an automobile is made in one place and sold to some other place, as opposed to every automobile is made in 7 different countries. So there's massive ignorance in terms of the opposition to free trade, and I'm going to stick with that one as well. Gary Johnson likes to point out when people say, "Oh, aren't you libertarians isolationists?" that we are the only ticket in support of free trade among the 3 major tickets this year, and it's true. A balanced budget is something that Gary Johnson and I have pledged in our first 100 days in office, if we were so fortunate as to get to Washington holding the reins. We've both done it at the state level. It's actually quite easy to do. Some of you may be old enough to remember that when Paul Cellucci and I came into office in 1991, we balanced a budget that was 15% out of whack in our first 45 days. We cut the state workforce by 15% our first day in office. It really, things were out of control. The Secretary of Administration and Finance said in the year we took office that the state was bankrupt, which it was, meaning it could not pay its bills as they fell due. And we were rewarded by the markets for that, in that our unemployment rate in my first term, Paul's in my first term, went from the highest among the industrialized nations to the lowest, because people understood that we were doing what's necessary to balance our budget. There's no thought about that in Washington, D.C. And I've worked in the past, back in the mid-90s, very hard on the balanced budget amendment. There's huge resistance in Washington. I remember a very capable chairman of the Senate Budget Committee saying to me in the mid-90s, "Bill, do we really have to balance the budget in just 7 years? Couldn't we take 9 years? It would be so much easier." To which the answer, which I borrowed from John Silber, Pete, it took 4.5 years to fight World War II. okay? It's a true fact. So I can't say enough bad things about Washington and the pig-headedness and the myopia down there. A particular, maybe the last hobby horse I'll mention that I would ride down in Washington, no matter what. And by the way, this is with a big L hat on. This is not with a wannabe R hat on. I want to be able to shoot at both those parties. And the last one, which has become kind of a favorite of mine on the stump this cycle, is the 10th Amendment. And people have forgotten that the U.S. federal government is a government of enumerated powers. All the powers that Congress has are laid out in Article 2, and they can do A, B, C, D, and E. And then there's a clause, Article 2, Section 8, that says they can do anything else necessary and proper to carry into effectuation the other express powers aforesaid. And people have driven a coach and four through that clause, and almost everything has been held to be necessary and proper to carry out some other power. But people have lost sight of the 10th Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. It was pushed by Jefferson and his folks. If it had not been agreed in advance that the Bill of Rights was going to be passed in 1789, that Constitution of 1787 would never have been ratified. But that agreement was made, so it was ratified, and then 1789, in came the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment says that the powers not expressly conferred on the federal government herein are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So this notion of enumerated powers is a helpful wayfinding piece of signage on the way to a lower level of government, to a smaller level of government. And I think we can get there. I mean, I think it's clear enough that we don't want top-heavy government, that the private sector, despite what some very high-ranking people in this country have said, it's in the private sector that jobs are created. Government does not create jobs by paying for highways. Government is paying for the infrastructure that we all need as the price of living in a civilized society. But if it weren't for the entrepreneurship and the innovation of American workers and American people in the employment community, we wouldn't have that job creation. I experienced this myself when I was in office. I'd go meet with small businesses, which is where the jobs mostly come from. Tell me what you need. I need 7 cents power, not 13 cents power like I'm getting now. If you can rationalize our energy situation and get me that power, I will build the plant next door. I will hire 9 more people. And that's how we got from the highest unemployment rate to the lowest. So there's a whole congeries of ideas here that are represented by the Libertarian Party. A lot of them reduced to liberty. A lot of them are just common sense. And I'm going to make it my job to try to contribute to the Libertarian Party over the course of the next 8 or 12 years, becoming the majority party in the United States. So everyone knows the Republican Party is going to split in two, either this year or next year, just as the Whig Party did in the 1850s. We can only hope that the result of that is that the know-nothing faction, the Trump faction, will spin out of control and disappear as the know-nothings did in the 1850s, and the other half of the Republican Party, or maybe it'll be the Libertarian Party, some nice party, will go on to elect Abraham Lincoln as President of the United States. But I'm very grateful to all of you for helping to make sure that the Libertarian Party does get that permanent seat at the table in Washington, D.C. There's nothing to be feared, particularly in this state. You go out and dragoon all your friends and neighbors to voting for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, and you won't be derogating from the cause of good government now or in the future. But it really would be a breath breath of fresh air to have a third voice in Washington, D.C. And as I say, I look forward to keeping on my big L hat as well as the small L libertarian hat I've always had in adult life, and trying to promote the causes in Washington that I've just been discussing. I'm so grateful to all of you for helping us get to the point where we can consider doing that. Thank you so much.